go.
Well, first of all, thank you so very much to our three handsome Italian men for joining us here in the evening where you are, but a special start time of 12 noon here on the West Coast in California. Thank you very much for being with us. Simone, Robe, Andrea, usually say just a couple of things as far as an introduction is concerned. And I will go somewhat deliberately, make sure that the gentlemen can have some sense for what I'm saying. And I think we have been lucky enough to this point with our Saturday wine program. We are just to this point mostly working with wines that are very special to us, that we are happy to introduce, especially if we have special guests with us. It is possible that Ferrando Carema is the most special to me of all of the red wines in the whole world. I was sending a note earlier today to an old colleague of mine with whom I worked at a restaurant in Los Angeles in 2003 in my first job as a wine director. And I was remembering in 2003 how it felt to taste, for me, for the first time, Ferrando Carema. And my sense of it in those early days, as I poured it into the glass, what must have been probably the 1998 vintage, I poured it into the glass, and the wine had a brickish quality to it, a reddish quality to it. It did not look like the very dense red wines that I was used to. And the flavor, which I will never forget, it was like there was 50% more flavor in this wine than in most red wines that I was used to tasting. It wasn't the least bit heavy, and I will never forget that an old associate of Neil's, who at that time was selling wine to me in Los Angeles, Roberto and Andrea maybe remember him. His name is Robert Brownson, and Robert looked at me the first time that I was ever tasting Ferrando Carema. And Robert said, "This is real wine." And that's a funny thing to say because a lot of people would say that a lot of wine is real wine. But what he meant by that is that this is a different wine that, I think this is what he meant. This is a different wine that has not been affected by the push to modernize or the push to make something international in style. Simone, do you feel like conveying? Are you communicating any of this to these guys, or is this too much, you think?
No, yes.
Okay.
Praticamente diceva Matt che quando per la prima volta ha assaggiato il Carema nel 2003 ha raccontato a queste persone che ha fatto assaggiare che questo vino era veramente un vino che era vino, un vero vino, real wine, che sembra strano dire real wine, però in realtà è tutto quello che voi fate dentro la bottiglia per farlo sembrare.
Excuse me, I found that compliments usually translate well.
Right, indeed. So I think, my first question about the wine, the way that I sometimes describe Carema is that while it is Nebbiolo from Piedmont, very often because it's so far north in Piedmont and because it's high altitude, sometimes you hear people describe Carema as red Burgundy with more tannic structure. So people equate it a little bit as far as weight is concerned, sometimes even with Pinot Noir. And Simone, I wonder if you could ask Roby and Andrea to describe the area around the Canavese and north of Ivrea as you head in the direction of Switzerland. Can you ask them to describe the area of northern Piedmont and how it differs from southern Piedmont, where Barolo and Barbaresco are made?
Yes, of course. Andrea, Roberto, Descrivi l'area intorno a Ivrea, la Val d'Aosta, e in che cosa il nebbiolo che cresce qua nelle nostre parti è diverso rispetto al nebbiolo delle altre parti del Piemonte.
Ok. Beh, noi qui ci troviamo nella parte nord-ovest del Piemonte, in un territorio che si chiama Canavese. Il Canavese è un territorio ai piedi delle montagne, appena vicino alle Prealpi. Ci troviamo confinanti con la Valle d'Aosta, a circa 40 km dalla città di Torino e a 60 dalla città di Aosta. Il nostro territorio è caratterizzato da colline moreniche, cioè quindi colline che derivano da un disfacimento dei ghiacciai. Anticamente, 3 o 4 milioni di anni fa, tutta la Valle d'Aosta era ricoperta da un immenso ghiacciaio, spesso fino a 700 metri, che finiva proprio in questo territorio del Canavese.
Simone, can you remember all of this?
Yes, I write it down. So I start with the first part, then we're going to talk about the difference between the Nebbiolo in Carema to the ones in the Langhe. So we are located in the northwest part of Piedmont. Ivrea is 40 kilometers north of Torino and 60 kilometers south from Aosta. Our territory is called Canavese. It's formed by morenic hill that is land of a glacier origin. About 3 million years ago, the whole Aosta Valley was covered by the Balteo Glacier that had a thickness of about 700 meters, which is about 2,300 feet. When the glacier descended towards the valley, it dug the hills and dragged fragments of rock from the Monte Bianco. Monte Bianco is the mountain where we went up with the funicular, if you remember, guys.
I do.
Yeah. When the glacier melted, all the fragments of rock remain on our hills, and now this is the place where they grow grapes. So adesso qual è la differenza del nebbiolo con le langhe?
Sì, quindi è un nebbiolo completamente diverso dal nebbiolo che cresce nelle langhe, prevalentemente per il fatto che i terreni sono diversi, il microclima è diverso. Come dicevo prima, noi ci troviamo in una zona più a nord, quindi una zona sicuramente più fresca rispetto alle langhe. I nostri terreni sono terreni completamente diversi dalle langhe, sono di origine morenica, quindi ricchi di minerali, il 60% sono composti da sabbia e questa è una zona sicuramente molto più fresca rispetto alle langhe.
So, he said that indeed Barolo and Barbaresco are the two most famous Piemontese wines in the world, of course. This is also because the territory of the Langhe is more extended and the production of bottle is higher than Carema. But the main difference is the constitution of the soil. So that, as we said before, is rich of minerals and poor of clay that is present in the Langhe. We are also in a further north area, which is therefore much cooler.
Simone, is it possible, it may not be possible, but is it possible for you to pull the computer closer to you?
Oh, yes.
We can see and hear you a little bit better.
Okay. Can you, is this a problem that you can hear me or you can see me?
I hear you fine, but we would like to, if we can increase the volume by you getting closer to the computer and we can see you better,
Okay.
that might be better.
Basta così o più vicino?
It is okay for now?
Is okay?
It's great.
Or more.
Grazie, Andrea.
Prego.
Matt, would you mind if I make
Hey.
observations?
Neil, go right ahead, please.
Just as an additional, to add a little additional flavor to what Roby and Andrea and Simone have been telling us, when we talk about the freshness of the climate in Carema, you should understand that we're referring mostly to the cool nights that persist during the summer. This is very important. This is typical of vineyards in a rather mountainous area. The days can be quite warm, but there are extreme differences in temperature from the morning and afternoon through the evening. And the evening temperatures, the cool evening temperatures, are what help to preserve the acidity and the freshness in the wines and allow for harvest to extend deep into the month of October. That extended growing season, I think, is part of what makes Carema so fascinating and so complex.
Thank you. So Simone, Roby, Andrea, we are now opening 2019 Erbaluce de Caluso La Torazza.
Okay.
And we are actually drinking Erbaluce di Caluso Spumante.
Yes. How nice.
2003?
Great.
Okay.
Maybe can Roberto and Andrea say a little bit about Erbaluce, the grape?
Devi parlare del vitigno Erbaluce,
Sì.
dire qualcosa.
Sì. Beh, è una delle poche uve bianche, il Piemonte è conosciuto nel mondo come produttore di vini rossi, di uve rosse e di uve rosse, ma abbiamo anche dei vitigni sicuramente importanti. L'Erbaluce è uno dei grandi vitigni bianchi piemontesi, è un'uva autoctona, cresce da sempre in questo territorio del Canavese, è un'uva che ha delle bellissime caratteristiche, una bella acidità naturale, una buccia spessa che quindi ci permette di fare anche un lungo appassimento per produrre il nostro Caluso passito e, come dicevo, avendo questa buona acidità naturale è ottimo anche per la spumantizzazione. È un'uva quindi molto versatile. Dalla stessa uva uno dei pochi vitigni italiani a produrre 3 denominazioni di origine controllata e garantita diverse.
Allora, so Erbaluce grape is a grape with a nice acidity and with a thick skin that always to produce 3 different types of DOCG denomination, which is the Erbaluce,
Erbaluce di Caluso Spumante,
Erbaluce di Caluso Spumante, and
Erbaluce di Caluso Passito,
and Passito, or Caluso Passito. So it's one of the greatest, as you say, white wine in Italy. We are not very famous in Italy for white wines. So all the people think that Piemonte, we only create red wine. But this is a great wine, as you say.
Matt, once again, if I may interject a little something here. Erbaluce is a grape that is limited in its expanse. Its home is in the Canavese. You don't find Erbaluce anywhere else. Erba is effectively, luce is light, erba is herb or flower. It is a grape that in a certain way reminds me or is somewhat parallel to Chenin Blanc in the Loire Valley in the sense that it is a grape that has the capacity to be harvested early with such a high natural acidity that is almost naturally sparkling, and that's why it is a candidate for making it into a spumante or a sparkling wine. In the case of the Ferrando family, the Erbaluce di Caluso Spumante that they produce normally rests on its skin on the leaves for about 5 years. It's a very, very complex and limited production wine that is produced at Ferrando's, and I think something that is very, very worthy of your attention. But that's the first part of it. When you can harvest those grapes relatively early in the season, you get a grape with a very, very high acidity that has almost a natural sparkle to it. Then it has a kind of skin, as Roby said, is very thick and allows it to have extended hang time. So that over the years, the Ferrando family has specialized in making an Erbaluce di Caluso Passito, which means the grapes are harvested quite late in the season, sometimes as late as into December. I've seen times, if I recall correctly, the harvest happened sort of towards Christmas, and those grapes are then left to dry in racks in the standard Passito fashion, which allows them to air dry. It evaporates most of the water. It makes for a very, very concentrated and deeply sweet and complex juice that is then fermented in the early part of the next year and turned into a great wine that can age actually forever. So
The Passito, you mean?
the Passito. So what we're seeing here in a certain way can mimic the way the Chenin Blanc works in Loire Valley, where you have a tendency for a grape that is exceedingly high in acidity when it is young, and then a natural acidity, and so it can be turned into a sparkling wine. It can be turned into a bone dry wine, as the wine you have right now, the Erbaluce di Caluso La Torazza, is a bone dry white wine, and then it can be morph into a more sweet and rich wines with very, very, very long hang time,
Yeah.
or rather extraordinary wines.
You know, I was instantly, I think most of the people who are with us have the Erbaluce, this 2019 La Terrazza in their glass, and they're tasting it now. And it's the first time that I've tasted this vintage of this wine, but I was instantly, when I smelled it and tasted it, I was reminded of this celebration lunch that some of us attended in March last year at a restaurant in Carema, where we were drinking some Ferrando Erbaluce. And the thing that occurs to me as I think about that lunch and I taste this wine is, in spite of the fact that this wine is bone dry, and in spite of the fact that the wine has lots of acidity, and in spite of the fact that the wine is not very expensive at all, it was a wine that was paired at that lunch with some very regal and rich cuisine. And it had no problem whatsoever. For instance, I forget what it was that we ate that was under a sabayon sauce at that lunch, but this wine was a dream.
I think it wasn't it the fonduta, Simone?
Simone, you remember that lunch?
Ramo Verde, right?
Yeah, Ramo Verde. We had.
Ramo Verde.
Who could forget that lunch? Who could forget that whole thing?
So, Simone and Roby, what about Erbaluce and food? What are the great foods to drink with dry Erbaluce, dry still, dry spumante? What are the great foods? What do people want to eat there?
Con l'erbaluce e lo spumante.
Ma diciamo che l'erbaluce per la sua acidità si presta bene ad essere abbinato a quasi qualsiasi tipo di pesce. Noi in zona, essendo una zona interna di laghi, lo abbiniamo ai pesci di acqua dolce. Se no va benissimo abbinato ai risotti, va benissimo abbinato ai primi pasti, o anche antipasti a base di carne o di qualche vegetale.
So they said you can combine it with any type of fish water, and we have a lot of fish water here from the lakes around the area, or basically to any kind of appetizer, or of course risotto made with Erbaluce wine.
Per esempio, se posso dare un consiglio, se hanno voglia di provare a fare un risotto all'erbaluce, con l'erbaluce all'interno, che viene ottimo.
So he suggests Matt suggests to make the risotto with Erbaluce, because as probably already done. Yeah.
And what are the other ingredients in the risotto with Erbaluce? Onion and fontina or parmesan?
No fontina.
No fontina.
No fontina.
Only onion.
Onion.
Allora, c'è cipolla.
Onion.
Cipolla, brodo vegetale.
Vegetable, okay.
Brodo vegetale e almeno 2-3 bicchieri di erbaluce.
E riso carnaroli.
Riso carnaroli, 2 or 3 glasses of Erbaluce and onion.
And will you please ask Andrea how much Erbaluce the person making the risotto should be drinking?
Quanti dovrebbero bere durante il risotto?
Una bottiglia, one bottle.
The person making the risotto. Okay, great. Thank you. Guys, what was Luigi Ferrando's first vintage?
Chi risponde? Sì.
Allora, la prima vendemmia fatta con le nostre uve che abbiamo vinificato è stata nel 1960.
1960.
1960. Yes.
La prima etichetta è stata 1957, etichettata Ferrando, ma per i primi 3 anni avevano acquistato le uve a Carema da piccoli viticoltori.
So initially they bought from small local producer and bottled and sold from 1957. But the first vintage with the Ferrando family produced the wine was 1960.
1960.
Yes.
And the 2 brothers were born, I'm guessing, maybe a little bit after that. When So they essentially grew up with the winery?
Yes. Quando sei nato tu?
67 e 65.
Andrea in 1965 and Roberto in 1967.
Roby, Andrea.
Hello.
Poi,
Greetings. How did you get here?
Il presidente. Il presidente.
scusate, è il capo di casa, Neil.
Capo di casa.
Il boss, il boss.
Still look like babies. Great to see you.
Simone, hi Terry. Nice to see you. Hi. Simone, can you, I think we, in just a minute or two, we will get into the 2016 Carema Etichetta Bianca. And maybe Roby and Andrea can describe a little bit the village of Carema.
Ok. Dice che tra un poco loro verranno il 2016 di Carema e se potete descrivere il villaggio, il paese di Carema.
Sì. Beh, il paese di Carema è l'ultimo comune, l'ultimo paese del Piemonte prima di entrare in Valle d'Aosta, quindi a tutti gli effetti è già un territorio di montagna. È già un territorio di montagna. Carema è un piccolo paese abitato da circa 900 persone. Il paese è incastonato in una conca naturale ai piedi di montagne alte 2500 metri. Dei terreni.
Sì.
Il paese di Carema veniva definito paese vigneto perché oltre ad essere circondato da queste terrazze in cui si coltivano dei vigneti, all'interno stesso del paese, tra una casa e l'altra, invece del cortile, piantavano la vite.
So, Carema is the last village in Piedmont before the Aosta Valley region. Is in a natural basin under a mountain of 2,500 meters, which is 8,200 feet. Also called Winers Village because in addition to being surrounded by vineyards, is in the center of the village where the inhabitants in the courtyards between the houses, they planted the vineyards.
Poi volevo dire che in questo territorio a Carema terreno agricolo da coltivare non ce n'era, quindi nei secoli l'uomo si è dovuto ingegnare per riuscire a trovare della terra da poter coltivare. Quindi hanno creato decine e decine di chilometri di muretti a secco e andando nel fondovalle, riempendosi le gerle, adesso non so come si dice le gerle, raccoglievano la terra dal fondovalle e andavano a riempire queste terrazze fatte da muretti a secco, dove da sempre si coltiva il nebbiolo.
So Roberto said that being a mountain village, there is no agricultural land. So over the centuries, man has created dozens of kilometers of dry stone walls, terraces, bringing the land from the bottom of the valley. So since always, therefore, there is cultivated the grapevine that is mainly Barolo, Nebbiolo.
No Barolo.
Nebbiolo.
No Barolo.
Nebbiolo.
And this photo that we are looking at here, am I right? It is looking to the north. So
Yes.
we're looking at Monte Bianco, or roughly, maybe in the distance, and that is
Yes, correct.
that is the village of Carema in the foreground, behind the vineyards. Is that right?
It's the new part of the village.
The new part of the village.
Yes.
So there are new vineyards that are being planted there.
Well, I don't know if they can, non so se possono piantare sotto.
No, nel piano non si può produrre il Carema nella zona pianeggiata.
You can't produce the Carema in the flat area of the village. This is the new part of the village. The old part is on the right of the photo.
Yes, right.
Solo dalla parte dove la
Matt, another observation from me. When I first visited with the Ferrando family in January of 1980, which is 40 years ago, over 40 years ago, the Carema vineyards consisted of about 40 hectares, which is about 100 acres of vineyard property. Today, there are approximately 16 hectares, which is 40 acres of vineyard property in in Carema. Many of the vineyards have been abandoned because of the difficulty of working the vineyards. It all has to be done by hand. It's on terraces at a very high elevation. This is the day, these are photos from the day we were all together in March 31, 2019, the day of my honorary citizenship in Carema.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
What a great day.
That was a great day. That was
Simone, can you tell us about the 2016 and how the guys feel about it as against other vintages?
Cosa ne pensate del Caremo 2016?
Ma secondo me il 2016 è una grande annata di Carema, è una grande annata e anche molto tipica per Carema. Rispetto alla 2015, che era stata un'annata più calda, la 2016 è stata un'annata un pochettino più fresca. Quindi si è tornato ad essere un tipico nebbiolo di Carema, con una leggera acidità superiore, ma una grande ed estrema finezza ed eleganza, secondo me. Io l'amo molto la 2016.
So I say 2016 is a great year compared to 2015, where the temperature was warmer. Roberto said that in his opinion, 2016 is a typical Carema wine, more than 2015.
More than 2015, which was a little bit warmer.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
And at what age, Simone, does the Ferrando family most like to drink this white label? How many years old?
Dici che noi abbiamo bevuto 62, perfetto adesso.
So Andrea just told me that he's already drink Carema from 1962, which is perfect right now.
So that would mean that they like it about 55 or 60 years old. Is that right? That would be an ideal window?
Yeah.
It sort of mimics the life cycle of a man.
Yeah.
Huh. Neil, do you agree with that? 50, 60 years old for a white label?
I still have some 62 we still have 62 in our cellar. And we have a lot of vintages in between.
What would you say as far as when a typical white label begins to really strut?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that the release date is usually 4 years after harvest. So that already starts the process. That's something that everybody should recognize, that these wines don't even come to the market until 4 years have passed. And then I would say a good deal of patience is required if you want to really appreciate the complexity of these wines. These are not big, enormous, powerful wines. These are wines of finesse and complexity that really take time to develop and give you the ultimate satisfaction. I think 10, 12 years is a nice time to start to open some things. But I will say that we had a rather remarkable tasting many, many years ago when Roby and Andrea came to New York back in late 1990s, I think, yeah. And we did a vertical from 1992 to 1962. There was not a single wine that was not in just pristine shape, no matter what the quality of the vintage. So we've never had a failure in all the years that we've been working together. And these wines have a magical ability to age. They are just consistently remarkable, whether they're 10 years old or 40 years old.
Simone, can you ask Roby and Andrea if somebody asks them, if someone does not know what Carema, what Ferrando Carema tastes like, how they describe it to, what does the wine taste like to them?
So say it again.
Can you ask Roby and Andrea how they describe the flavor of their Carema? If somebody is not familiar with the wine, what would they say? How do they describe it?
Del Carema. Cioè, è una domanda nuova questa. Come descrivi il Carema in bocca? Il sapore?
Ma la descrizione del Carema, secondo me, è uno dei... Io penso sempre che il Carema sia uno dei grandi vini rossi italiani, sicuramente è uno dei grandi nebbioli che riusciamo a fare noi qui in Piemonte. La differenza fondamentale è questa buona acidità che ci consente di ottenere questo vino, avere una lunga evoluzione nel tempo grazie a questa acidità che è data proprio da questo clima e da questo terreno che abbiamo noi in zona Ancarema. Le caratteristiche fondamentali sono quelle, sono dovute anche e soprattutto al modo in cui viene coltivato questo vino, che viene coltivato a differenza della zona di Barolo Barbaresco, oltre al terreno. La differenza fondamentale è il modo in cui noi coltiviamo il Carema, che è il nostro modo di coltivare a pergola invece che a Guyot, come nella zona di Barolo Barbaresco.
So I don't know if you reply correctly to your question.
We'll be happy to hear whatever it is that he had to say.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'll fill in the blanks.
Okay. So the most important thing is that the acidity of the grape. So they lived a long tasting wine, and the other difference is also the way of it's cultivated. In Carema, there is not a Guyot system, but you have a pergola system, which is a wooden structure resting on pillars and made of stone. So that's the great difference between the Carema and the Nebbiolo from Carema and the Nebbiolo from the Langhe. So Neil, please fill the blanks.
Let me fill in a little bit. Regarding the pergola system in Carema, the reason for that is that you try and get the maximum exposure to the sun during the day, and the stones underneath there's a very, very tiny amount of topsoil. Everything else is stone, and the stone terraces and the stone underneath the vineyards reflect back the heat of the day during the evening hours. So that it keeps this constant sort of perpetual rotation of cool air and the warmth from the soil coming back from the sun, from the exposure to the sun.
Neil, it's like radiant heating in a home.
In a certain way it is, except that this is a natural process rather than an artificial one. And it's one of the miracles of growing grapes in this very high altitude zone. You know that basically these vineyards are in the shadow of Mont Blanc. It is one of the most majestic, and for me, frankly, the most beautiful area in the wine world, certainly my wine world. I have a deep love for this mountain area. And I think anybody who cares very much about wine should visit Carema, because when you come through the tunnel from Mont Blanc and you come into the Val d'Aosta, this magnificent expanse of vineyards on the sides of these steeply terraced hillsides, it's just an extraordinary experience visually. With respect to the flavors of this wine, as Andrea reported, the acidity is absolutely critical in making this wine what it is. I would say that it is typical of mountain wines in this sense. Number one, I think from a fruit perspective, what you are seeing here are sort of the flavors of dried red and black cherries that are augmented by the smells of the mountainside, the mountain herbs. There's much juniper. There's a good deal of a whole variety of, sort of mimics the garrigue of the southern part of France, except these are mountain herbs. You will sense that. You'll sense a little note of pine resin, I think, occasionally in the Carema because of its proximity to these mountain forests. It is an amalgam of many aromas and flavors, all of which are quite subtle and work together in this beautiful symphony, much like it's a beautiful symphony of flavors and smells, and a wine that has exceptional persistence on the palate.
Simone.
Yes.
Has anything changed in the winemaking at Ferrando since Luigi has retired and Roby and Andrea are in charge now and making decisions?
Yes. Sì, ho capito.
Ok, capito?
Sì. Ma no,
vai.
Da quando papà Luigi non è più in azienda, ma siamo rimasti Roberto, Ma è cambiato ben poco sulla lavorazione del vino, nel senso sulla lavorazione della terra, nel senso che comunque noi continuiamo a lavorare sulla pulizia del vino per ottenere il massimo dalle nostre uve quando le portiamo in cantina. Quello che è cambiato fondamentalmente non è dovuto a noi, ma è dovuto al clima. Negli anni 70-80 il clima a Carema era un clima molto, molto più freddo di adesso e quindi facciamo fatica a portare l'uva a maturazione completa, anche vendemmiando 15-20 ottobre. Mentre negli ultimi 10-15 anni il clima è cambiato, ci sono delle estate molto più calde e riusciamo a ottenere delle maturazioni praticamente perfette, anche andando a vendemmiare sempre il 15-20 ottobre. Quindi quello che è cambiato fondamentalmente è dovuto al cambiamento di clima, ma non al cambiamento del nostro modo di intendere e di volere il grande nebbiolo di Carema.
Okay. So Andrea said that nothing has changed because they always try to represent the wine and the territory inside the bottle in the best possible way. So they always done a little works on wine. What has changed in recent years is the climate. That if it's in the 70s and the 80s in Carema had problems with the ripening of grapes, today instead of with the global warming in our area, they have some advantages because the wine is ready immediately instead of the previous years, which was not used. I mean,
No,
basically, I think what has happened here, there's no change in the vinification process. What the differences are essentially derived from the warming that we've seen in the climate, so that harvest date has probably advanced maybe by a week, but the difference is that they're harvesting grapes at a much higher degree of natural sugar, so that they're not struggling so much to achieve maturity. And so to that degree, there is an advantage to the global warming. We're getting consistently riper grapes. These wines are never overwhelmingly ripe. They never give you that kind of jammy quality. That's something that is one of the beautiful things about Carema, that we are essentially, one of the things that we're searching for at Rosenthal Wine Merchants is to find growing zones that allow us to buy wines that match our palate, which require a very high degree of natural acidity. And that's something that we're not lacking for in Carema, despite the global warming.
Neil, there are a lot of people, Neil and Simone especially, I should mention that Simone is a travel guide extraordinaire, that he takes wonderful people from Italy, but I think also maybe from other, well, he guided us when we were there, and it's hard to imagine that anyone could be better at his work than Simone is. He's very, very good at this. And there are many questions in the margins here about when it might happen that a trip might be arranged for some of us to come over and spend just a few minutes, walking the vineyards in Carema and maybe have a meal. Maybe
well, I'm so pleased that you've opened the door to a little commercial rant here. We are prepared as soon as we get control over this COVID thing, and we're allowed, and Americans allowed back into Europe. We have a wonderful trip through the Alto Piemonte and the Val d'Aosta that ends in Torino, that we run through Mad Rose Journeys, that I think is rather spectacular. Matt, Chris, and Amy participated in that to some degree last year, and it's a fascinating trip, and I think it's areas that most people have never seen before, and the beauty and the cuisine and the wines are rather exceptional. The Canavese and Carema are the westward extension of the Alto Piemonte that runs ultimately into the Val d'Aosta. And as Roby and Andrea said before, Carema is the very last village before you cross the border into the Val d'Aosta. And it is, by the way, the last area where Nebbiolo effectively grows, because any higher than that, a Nebbiolo does not manage to ripen. We are seeing some attempts now to plant Nebbiolo in the Val d'Aosta as the climate warms, but the sweet spot, as far as I'm concerned, and for the last 40 years for me, has been Nebbiolo in Carema. And you certainly are all welcome to join us. It's a rather fabulous area to visit, places that most people don't go. And we certainly invite you to inquire, and I'm happy to take any kind of and enter into any discussions. We're happy to drag Matt and his team along with us and make them cook for us.
And it's going to be a lot of amount of food.
Yeah.
A lot of food and a lot of wine.
A lot of wine.
That's Mad Rose, Neil?
Mad Rose Journeys. Yeah.
So they have a Rosenthal page for you.
Oh, they do, huh?
Simone, one question that I have been wanting to ask Roby and Andrea is about their sense of Carema and its place in the market around the world. In the 1960s and 1970s, I imagine that most wine that was made stayed in Italy. And then at some point, of course, with Neil's work, and I'm asking about other sales in Europe, Carema became known outside of Italy. Can they describe what Carema was in the 1960s and 70s and what it has become? Maybe also mentioning what the total production, how much Carema does the Ferrando family make?
Okay. Sono due fare due assieme. Ho fatto quella più
Volevo sapere il commercio del vino e anche quanto vino producete
all'anno.
all'anno.
Ok. Oggi di Carema produciamo circa 7-8 mila bottiglie all'anno, suddivise tra le due etichette, etichetta bianca e etichetta nera, quando l'etichetta nera viene fatta, perché l'etichetta nera viene fatta solo nelle annate migliori.
Vai, di tutto.
Invece per quanto riguarda i mercati, negli anni 60 era un mercato prevalentemente locale, il vino veniva venduto in Piemonte e in Italia. All'inizio degli anni 70 hanno iniziato a esserci le prime esportazioni, accompagnate agli altri grandi vini importanti piemontesi come Barolo e Barbaresco. I primi mercati in cui è andato il Carema negli anni 70 sono stati gli Stati Uniti e l'Inghilterra. Poi dagli anni 80, quando abbiamo conosciuto Neil Rosenthal, il mercato degli Stati Uniti è diventato sempre più importante per il suo grande lavoro, la sua grande passione che aveva per questo vino, e devo dire che oggi, nel 2020, gli Stati Uniti sono per noi il mercato più importante, anche se abbiamo moltissime richieste da un po' tutte le parti del mondo. Oggi vendiamo, oltre che negli Stati Uniti, vendiamo in Canada, in Inghilterra, in Norvegia, in Germania, in Svizzera e arriviamo fino all'Australia. Però parliamo sempre di poche decine di bottiglie per ogni paese.
So Andrea said that in the 70s, the vast majority of the wine was sold locally and in Italy. Already in the mid-70s, Luigi opened it to the foreign market, which was represented by England and the United States. So it all when he first met Neil in the 80s. So today's in terms of number, the most important market is of course United States, but some bottles was also sent to other countries such as Canada, Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, and Australia. And currently they produce 7,000 bottles of Carema wine per year, 7,000, 8,000 bottles per year.
And that is total of the Bianca and the Nera?
Yes,
7,000 bottles total.
Yes.
So that is about six or 700 cases.
So quante casse di vino?
Sì, 600, 700.
Sì, yes, correct.
600 or 700 cases, white label and black label together for the whole world.
Yeah, for the world, yes.
Neil, why am I very surprised to hear those numbers? That means that you are bringing in half of that, or
more than that.
more than half?
Yeah.
So you bringing in 400 or 500 cases total per year of the two, of the white and the black?
I forget the numbers, but we're trying to expand it because together with Roby and Andrea, we're trying to buy more property in Carema. Some of the abandoned vineyards, some of the vineyards we're trying to convince some of our neighbors in Carema to sell us some of the properties so we can produce more wine.
It seems like an astonishingly small number of bottles and cases, yeah.
It is. Remember, there's only 100 acres of vineyard in all of Carema.
Right.
I mean, I take that back. We're 16. No, it's 40 acres. 40 acres of vineyards right now that are active in Carema. That's it, 40 acres.
Vorrei spiegarvi solo una cosa. Carema, come diceva prima Neil, tutta la denominazione Carema oggi sono circa 16 ettari, suddivisi tra tutte le famiglie di Carema. Quindi ogni famiglia a Carema è proprietaria di circa 1500-2000 metri quadrati. Quindi c'è un frazionamento dei terreni enorme. La cosa più difficile è riuscire a mettere insieme qualche piccolo proprietario che magari non riesce più a gestire i vigneti e farseli dare in conduzione. Neil ne sa qualcosa perché stiamo cercando di farlo in questi anni insieme anche.
Noi controlliamo quanti in questo momento?
Circa 2 ettari.
We have about 2 hectares of the 16 between the Ferrandos and me. And us.
Gli altri sono tutti associati alla cantina cooperativa, piccoli produttori, piccoli viticoltori che sono associati alla cantina cooperativa, che è l'altro produttore.
So basically what Roby is saying, that the vineyards are, you know, every family has a row or 2 or 3 of vineyards, and they generally render their grapes to the cooperative. For many, many, many years, the Ferrandos were the only people to independently bottle Carema.
Però la cooperativa, siccome non sta facendo niente per la gestione dei vigneti, noi ci stiamo impegnando invece direttamente nella gestione, e quando troviamo qualcuno che non riesce più, qualche persona anziana che non riesce più a gestire, subentriamo noi se riusciamo a convincerlo a darci terreni.
Our goal, Matt, is to completely dominate the vineyard scene in Carema, so that we have a complete monopole.
Monopole in Carema, right?
Ferrando Rosenthal monopole of Carema.
Simone, a dear friend of ours, who moved to Sweden a year or 2 ago, wants to know whether there's any chance that he can find Carema in Sweden.
C'è un loro carissimo amico che si è trasferito in Svezia un paio di anni fa, e se c'è qualche possibilità di trovarlo in Svezia.
Molto probabilmente ci sarà a breve qualche possibilità di trovarlo, sì.
So he's going to have a possibility in the near future, since are you going to export?
Sì.
Okay.
Sì.
Con il nostro amico Finn, no?
No, lui non l'ho più sentito.
Ok.
No.
So tu hai esportato in Svezia?
Sì, ho esportato.
So the export, yes, you can find it in Sweden.
Good. Great.
We
Well,
have a question here.
Ben Anderson, please.
So I'm with a friend and client here, Walker Stranges, and Walker actually had provided this 85 that we're trying today, and he's the one that opened that 66 a few nights ago. He's kind of specialized in sourcing really old, mainly Piemonte wine directly from cellars in Italy. And we've drunk some older Cantina, the cooperative Caremas also. We had an 89 recently, and we were talking earlier in the call about, you know, what's the difference of the winemaking and the élevage? I mean, are they for what Ferrando is doing and how the cooperative is making their wine? And, is there a big difference in terms of like how long it's aged, how the maceration? Do you know how they're making the wine over at the cooperative?
Is that a question for Simone and the Ferrandos?
Yeah. Come la cooperativa fa il vino differente che la famiglia di Ferrando, no?
Sì, assolutamente. Devo dire, soprattutto negli ultimi anni, la cooperativa anche si è messa a lavorare in una maniera sicuramente migliore rispetto a una volta. Una volta, secondo il mio punto di vista, avevano qualche problema nella vinificazione. Io non so dire esattamente loro come lavorino in cantina, so solo come lavoriamo noi e oggi cerchiamo di portare avanti quella che è stata sempre la nostra tradizione, quindi di riuscire a far rispecchiare nella bottiglia il territorio da cui deriva quel nebbiolo. Facciamo delle macerazioni, delle fermentazioni in acciaio, delle macerazioni che durano all'incirca 20 giorni, dopodiché facciamo fare la malolattica in acciaio e 36 mesi di affinamento in legno. Oggi il disciplinare del carema, di produzione del carema è cambiato, si potrebbe produrre carema con i soli 24 mesi di affinamento, ma noi siamo rimasti alle tradizioni che erano i 36 mesi, perché crediamo che questi nebbioli abbiano bisogno di un po' più tempo per affinarsi nel legno.
Yeah, this is the key difference. If I may jump in here, the key difference is the length of the élevage, which is to say, when I first started working with the Ferrando family back in 1980, it used to be a 5-year period before the carema could be released and be classified as carema. It's now shorter, as it has been in all instances. Barolo has suffered the same fate, Barbaresco the same fate, Brunello equally. You can release these wines much earlier now, and there are multiple reasons for that, most of them being economic. Certainly the cooperative releases its wines at least a year, if not a year and a half earlier than the Ferrandos release their wine. That's a big, big difference. These wines take time.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end of the hour, and I want to make a couple of quick announcements. And as always, give anyone with a pressing question that is coming to the fore, please don't hesitate to fire away with that question. In the meantime, I will tell you a little bit of news that was not in your morning newspaper this morning, but you will all be the first to know, is that for a week or so, with the considerable assist from our friends, the Heislers, who walked in a little wheel of Epoisse cheese to us, I think, last weekend. We have been working diligently on developing an Epoisse cheeseburger pizza that is now available on our Heirloom Pizza website. It is a hamburger with Epoisse cheese and onion jam and arugula and a little mozzarella. And Chris described it last week when we tasted our first iteration as sinful. That was the one word Chris just looked up, and it's kind of sinful. So that is happening at Epoisse Pizza. And then, as it is always my habit to do, I will let you know that next Saturday at our normal time at 6 o'clock, we will be joined by Jim Clendenin for a library Au Bon Climat tasting. We are opening 2 bottles from the 2001 vintage from Jim's work in 2001 in Santa Barbara County. We'll be opening the Estate Pinot Noir, which is Le Bon Climat and Bien Nacido, and his Hildegard, which is a blend of Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc that's almost 20 years old in both cases. So Jim Clendenin next week at 6 o'clock p.m. with a couple of 20-year-old Santa Barbara wines should be, I think, quite a lot of fun. We're excited about it. Does anyone have final questions for these Italian? We certainly can get more. We have more Herbaluce, Bill Franklin, on site, and I am under the impression that there is plenty more of it. So send us a note when this is over, and we will be happy to set that aside for you. Does anyone have any other questions about Carema or winemaking at Ferrando or okay? Well, thank you. This is our second ever international Zoom tasting. Cecile, we're all catching a flight on Tuesday morning. We'll be landing in Geneva and then making our way to Milan. And yeah, we're all set on a tour. not everybody was clear on this, that if you purchased the bottles this week, it also bought you a plane ticket and participation in this tour of Alto Piemonte and the Valle d'Aosta. Well, next year, perhaps, right, Neil, next spring?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Cecile, this has been recorded, so I'll send out a link. And if anyone wants to forward this to a friend to watch Roberto and Andrea talk about the history of the domain and the wines, it certainly will be available. Simone Pozzo, thank you so very much for your diligent work. You were terrific. And Roby and Andrea, so very nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ciao. Grazie a voi. Grazie a voi. Thank you so
Grazie
much.
mille.
Ciao.
Neil, thank you for all of your help.
Hey, it's great.
Appreciate it.
It's always great to be with Matt and Chris and Amy, my great friends from San Francisco. Thanks. It's great. Roby, Andrea, Simone.
Ciao, buonanotte. Ciao Neil.
Baci.
Baci.
Buona vendemmia, amici.
Grazie mille.
Presto a tutti noi.
Ciao, grazie.
Ciao.
Ciao, grazie a tutti. Ciao Matt.
Ciao Neil.
Ciao Matt. Ciao Chris. Ciao Amy.
Ciao.
Ciao a tutti.